as this relationship is becoming even more important than it has been in the past. More important because China is growing so much. China's GDP will double that of the United States in the not too distant future. And it's critical that we think about that and be honest about it and ask honest, constructive questions of how we make sure that the gears mesh, not grind.
And this is not the first time that U.S. China relationship has faced a period of tension. In fact, during my tenure as U.S. ambassador to China alone, we had to deal with two major conflicts. As I took up my post in February of 1996, the People's Republic of China was conducting military exercises and missile tests in the Taiwan Strait. In response, the government of the United States dispatched 2 aircraft carrier groups into that region. This is what I call a sweaty palms time. In 1996, after we spent 3 years building ties in Beijing, a U.S. bomb hit the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during the NATO strikes on Yugoslavia. Demonstrations sprung up in Beijing. The U.S. embassy there was almost destroyed. But we worked through that. The diplomatic capital was in place to effectively address these areas of concern and swiftly respond to unexpected conflicts as they arose. And I look back on this time simply to say that this is not the first time that we've had serious difficulties. But the answer is not to go backwards. Ending engagement will not somehow turn back the clock.
These days, some in fact argue that the emerging American-Chinese duopoly in the world must inherently generate eventual hostility. And hence, they conclude that conflict between America and China is inevitable. And admittedly, it is a historical fact that during the last 200 years, since the onset of what we might call global politics, 4 long wars were fought for domination over Europe. However, I personally do not believe that wars for global domination are still a serious prospect in what is now clearly the post-hegemonic age. First of all, nuclear weapons make hegemonic wars too destructive, and thus victory meaningless. One-sided national economic triumphs cannot be achieved in the increasingly interwoven global economy without precipitating calamitous consequences for everyone. The populations of the world are now politically awakened, activist, and hence not easily subdued, even by much more powerful nations. Last but not least, neither America nor China are driven by hostile ideologies, and neither one of them is suicidal.
To me, what is really most striking about the Sino-American relationship is the existence, the persistence of parallel narratives. The Shanghai Communique exemplifies this with its candid recitation of differences, plus its affirmation of the potential interest inherent in our possibly overcoming these differences. Our two countries have seldom agreed about much of anything, but we have agreed about enough to produce mutually advantageous results. We've managed to achieve a reasonable facsimile of cooperation without, for the most part, working together. We may not have agreed on joint action, but we have contrived to follow parallel policies. 42 years ago, during the Nixon visit to Beijing, I got into a mild argument with Zhang Hanzhi, the late Zhang Hanzhi, a lovely lady whose passing diminishes us all, about what parallel policies might mean. Parallel can be rendered in Chinese in at least two ways. Ms. Zhang seemed to favor 并行不悖. This defines parallel in mathematical terms. It means lines that proceed equidistantly and never converge. I told her I preferred 异途同归, which means to proceed by different paths to the same ends. 并行不悖 implies eternal differences. 异途同归 suggests that common goals can be pursued by separately decided paths. We still don't know which definition of parallel will ultimately apply in Sino-American relations, but I remain optimistic. I believe that China and the United States can chart the courses we must, either separately or jointly, to destinations that serve the interests of both countries.
Are we able to build a more stable and prosperous world for the benefits of all countries? Can China and the United States take the lead in these joint efforts? I hope and I believe our two countries will make the right choice to confront the challenges and seize the historic opportunities. But this is not only a task for our two governments. We need the support and the participation of our two peoples.
I think there's no more important relationship in today's world than the one between the United States and the PRC. And that's because of the incredibly large number of people involved, the populations of the two countries, the relative impact economically and militarily, socially, and every other aspect on this world. And as we look to the future, it's something that requires, in my opinion, a lot of attention and a lot of hard work. And of all aspects of the relationship between the U.S. and the PRC, the one that I found, certainly during my time out in the Pacific, that was lacking and dragging behind the others was the relationship between the two militaries. I think it's very, very important that this be addressed on a regular basis. And it's important because we cannot afford, in my opinion, to make a mistake, to make a misjudgment, to make assumptions that are based on a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. And unless, in my experience of some years out at sea and in dealing with people in other countries, unless people get to know one another and understand what they're thinking about and understand their priorities and fundamentally recognize that people, whether they're from China, the United States, from Europe, from Africa, whatever, that we're fundamentally the same people with the same desires and needs, then potential trouble looms.
And a strong U.S. China relationship is good for the entire world. Because so many of the issues confronting our world, from climate change to finding cures for the most dreaded diseases, to fighting terrorism, to alleviating hunger, cannot be solved by the United States or China alone. The world is looking for leadership from both China and the United States joining together to address these very tough issues.
Well, I think there are some problems on both sides. On the U.S. side, the main problem is that we don't want to accept China coming close in economic size or technological capability to the U.S. And that is happening. We can't stop it. So the main challenge now is to change the psychology in the U.S.
There's a lot to resolve. There are a lot of different issues, but we need to have that dialogue and have this going and coming, talking to each other, and trying to resolve some of these problems. It doesn't mean we'll always agree on the issues of concern, but it takes a while, and it's good to try to keep up that momentum. I think that's very important.